The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon, one of those perfectly ordinary moments that you don't realize is about to shift everything until it's already happening. I was at my desk, reviewing blueprints for a new community center when my phone buzzed with my mother's ringtone, that classical piece she'd chosen because it sounded refined and proper, just like everything else in her carefully curated life. "What do you mean you canceled the reservation?" The words came out sharper than I intended as I gripped my phone and stepped away from my desk, finding a quiet corner in the hallway where my colleagues wouldn't hear the tremor in my voice. My engagement party was supposed to be this Saturday, just 4 days away, and we'd sent out invitations to 75 people weeks ago, carefully selected friends and family who I thought would celebrate this milestone with genuine joy. "The venue was simply too expensive, Emma," my mother replied, and I could picture her sitting in her pristine white kitchen, probably arranging flowers while delivering this devastating news with the same casual tone she'd used to discuss changing lunch plans. "Your father and I discussed it last night, and we just can't justify spending that much on a party, especially given the circumstances." The circumstances. Even through the phone, I could hear the weight she placed on those words, the unspoken criticism wrapped in false concern. The Rosewood Country Club wasn't just any venue to me. It was where I'd dreamed of celebrating life's important moments since I was 16, watching other families host their joyful gatherings on that beautiful terrace overlooking the gardens. I'd saved pictures of it in a folder on my computer labeled "Someday," and when Michael proposed, booking it for our engagement party felt like claiming a piece of the future I'd always imagined. "Dreams need to align with reality, dear," my mother continued, and I could hear the soft clink of her coffee cup against the saucer, such a normal sound during such an abnormal conversation. "I've been looking at some charming restaurant private rooms that would be more appropriate for your situation. There are several nice options downtown, nothing too fancy, but perfectly suitable. Suitable, appropriate." My mother had a way of using these words like weapons, each one carefully chosen to remind me that my choices, my life, my love, didn't quite measure up to the standards she'd set. "We already put down a deposit," I said, trying to keep my voice steady even as I felt tears burning behind my eyes. "How much could you possibly be saving by canceling now?" The deposit was non-refundable, $2,000 that Michael and I had saved for months to afford. There was a pause, the kind that told me more than words ever could. In that silence, I heard everything she wasn't saying, all the disappointment and judgment she'd been storing up since I first brought Michael home for dinner 8 months ago. "It's not just about the money, Emma," she finally said, and her voice had that quality of forced patience, like she was explaining something obvious to a child who refused to understand. "It's about setting reasonable expectations for your future. With Michael's background and career prospects, perhaps it's better to start with something more modest. You don't want to give people the wrong impression about what kind of life you'll be living." The implication hit me like a physical blow, making my stomach clench and my free hand ball into a fist at my side. My mother, the woman who had taught me to tie my shoes and braid my hair, who had sat through countless dance recitals and graduation ceremonies, was telling me that the man I loved wasn't worthy of a beautiful engagement party because he didn't come from money, because he worked with his hands instead of sitting in a boardroom. I ended the call with the promises to discuss it later, though we both knew the decision had been made without me. As I stood in that sterile office hallway, fluorescent lights humming overhead, I felt something fundamental shift inside me, like a door closing on the relationship I thought I had with my parents. My name is Emma Catherine Morrison, and at 31 years old, I thought I'd figured out how to balance the two worlds I inhabited. There was the world I'd grown up in, all marble foyers and charity galas in Charlotte's most exclusive neighborhood, where success was measured in square footage and the age of your country club membership. Then there was the world I'd chosen, full of late-night Chinese takeout and weekend trips to Home Depot, where success meant creating something meaningful with your own two hands and finding someone who loved you for exactly who you were. I'd spent my 20s trying to prove I could make it without my family's connections or money. After graduating from UNC with a degree in architecture, I could have walked into a position at any of the prestigious firms where my father played golf with the partners. Instead, I joined a small company specializing in affordable housing and community development. My parents tolerated this choice, viewing it as a phase I'd outgrow, like when I'd insisted on volunteering at the animal shelter in high school, despite my mother's concerns about getting dirty. My younger sister Lauren had made all the right choices, at least in our parents' eyes. She studied business at Duke, joined our mother's sorority, and was now engaged to Preston Hamilton III, whose family owned half the commercial real estate in Charlotte. Their engagement party had been held at the Rosewood Country Club, naturally, with 300 guests and a string quartet. The photos had run in the society pages, my mother's crowning achievement after years of careful social climbing. But I'd found something different with Michael Torres, something real and grounding and wonderfully ordinary. We met at a coffee shop near one of my job sites. He was the contractor on the building next door, and he'd noticed me struggling with rolled up blueprints in the wind. Without a word, he'd helped me carry them inside, then offered to buy my coffee as an apology for the construction noise. His hands were calloused from work, his smile genuine, and when he laughed at my terrible joke about architectural puns, I felt something click into place. Michael grew up in a working-class neighborhood on the south side of Charlotte, raised by a single mother who cleaned houses to put him through trade school. He'd built his contracting business from nothing, earning a reputation for quality work and fair prices. He drove a 10-year-old pickup truck that he maintained himself, lived in a modest apartment he was slowly renovating, and had this way of seeing straight through to what really mattered in any situation. My parents met him for the first time at a restaurant they'd chosen, one of those places where the waiters explain every ingredient and the prices aren't on the menu. Michael had dressed carefully in his best clothes, but I saw my mother's eyes catalog every detail that marked him as other. The off-the-rack suit, the wrong fork used for the salad, the way he thanked the server too warmly. My father had grilled him about his business prospects, his 5-year plan, his ability to provide for me, as if I hadn't been providing for myself just fine for the better part of a decade. "Well, he seems nice enough," my mother had said afterward, damning him with faint praise while my father muttered about prenuptials and protecting family assets. They'd been coolly polite in subsequent interactions, never quite rude enough for me to call them out, but never warm either. I told myself they just needed time to see what I saw. A man who worked hard, who treated me as an equal, who made me laugh until my sides hurt and held me when the stress of trying to please everyone became too much. When Michael proposed on a quiet Sunday morning, making me breakfast and hiding the ring in my coffee cup, I said yes without hesitation. The ring was simple, a solitaire he'd saved for months to buy, and it was perfect because it came from him. My parents' congratulations felt hollow, my mother immediately suggesting I have the stone reset in a more elaborate setting, my father offering to help with a down payment on a house in a better neighborhood. Both of them missing the point entirely. Now, walking back to my desk, I felt the weight of their judgment pressing down on me. My coworker Sarah looked up as I passed, concern flickering across her face. "Everything okay?" she asked, and I wanted to tell her everything, to spill out the hurt and frustration that was building in my chest. Instead, I forced a smile and nodded, sitting back down to stare blankly at blueprints that suddenly seemed less important than figuring out how to tell Michael that my parents had deemed our love unworthy of proper celebration. My phone buzzed with a text, and I expected it to be Michael checking in about dinner plans, or my mother with some half-hearted attempt at smoothing things over. Instead, it was from Lauren. "Mom just told me about the Rosewood. Sorry, Em, but look on the bright side. She's upgrading my bridal shower venue to make up for the family embarrassment. Isn't that great?" I read the message 3 times, each word sinking in like a stone dropped in still water. The Rosewood Country Club, the venue my parents claimed they couldn't afford for my engagement party, would now host my sister's bridal shower. The cruelty of it was breathtaking, the casual way Lauren shared this news as if it wouldn't shatter something inside me. She'd ended with that vapid, "Isn't that great?" as though I should celebrate being pushed aside for the daughter who'd made all the right choices. The family embarrassment, that's what my engagement had become. Not a celebration, not a joy, but an embarrassment to be minimized and managed. I thought about all the times I'd defended my parents to Michael when he'd sensed their disapproval, all the excuses I'd made for their behavior. "They just need time," I'd said. "They're not used to someone like you. Once they see how happy you make me, they'll come around." But sitting there with Lauren's text burning bright on my phone screen, I finally understood that they hadn't canceled because of money. They'd canceled because they were ashamed of my choice, ashamed of Michael, ashamed of me. The rest of the workday passed in a blur. I went through the motions of reviewing plans and answering emails, but my mind kept circling back to that text, to my mother's careful words, to the deposit we'd lose on a venue that would now host my sister's perfect pre-wedding celebration. When 5 o'clock finally came, I gathered my things and headed to Michael's apartment, needing to be somewhere that felt like home. I found him in his small kitchen, cooking dinner with the focused attention he brought to everything he did. The apartment smelled like garlic and herbs, and for a moment I just stood in the doorway watching him, this good man who my parents had decided wasn't enough. He turned when he heard me, and his smile faded immediately when he saw my face. "What happened?" he asked, setting down his spoon and crossing to me in 2 quick strides. His hands were gentle as they cupped my face, thumbs brushing away tears I hadn't realized were falling. I told him everything, words tumbling out between sobs, the whole ugly truth of my parents' snobbery and Lauren's thoughtless cruelty. He listened without interrupting, holding me steady as I fell apart. When I finally ran out of words, we stood there in his tiny kitchen, the dinner forgotten on the stove. "I'm sorry they hurt you," he said quietly, and there was sadness in his dark eyes, but no surprise. "But Emma, I'm not shocked by how they feel about me. I've seen the way they look at me, like I'm something they stepped in. I thought they'd at least try," I whispered, my voice hoarse from crying. "I thought family mattered more than money or status. I thought love would be enough." Michael sighed, pulling me closer until my head rested against his chest, where I could hear his steady heartbeat. "Some people can only see value in what they already understand," he said, his voice rumbling through his chest. "Your parents measure worth in a specific way, and I don't fit their calculations. I never will, no matter how hard I work or how much I love you." His calm acceptance somehow made everything worse. He'd known all along what I'd refused to see, had endured their subtle dismissals and not-so-subtle snobbery because he loved me. And what had I done? I'd made excuses, asked him to try harder, to prove himself to people who had already made up their minds the moment they saw his work truck in their circular driveway. "We should host our own party," I said suddenly, pulling back to look at him. The idea formed as I spoke, desperate and determined. Something simple but meaningful. We don't need the Rosewood, we don't need their money, we definitely don't need their approval. Let's celebrate our engagement with people who actually care about us, who see us for who we really are. Michael studied my face, and I saw the concern there alongside his love. "Are you sure?" he asked carefully. "These are your parents, Emma. I don't want to be the reason you lose your family. I don't want you to regret choosing me." The pain in his voice nearly broke me all over again. He'd been carrying this weight, this worry that he was costing me too much, and I hadn't even noticed. "You're not the reason," I said firmly, taking his hands in mine and squeezing tight. "Their behavior is the reason. Their narrow minds and cold hearts. Please, let's do this our way. Let's show them that their approval isn't necessary for our happiness." After a long moment, he nodded, and I saw something shift in his expression, a determination matching my own. We salvaged dinner and spent the evening planning, searching for venues on our phones, making lists of the people who truly mattered to us. By Thursday, I'd found the perfect spot, a rooftop garden at a local brewery, strung with lights and full of plants, casual and welcoming and completely us. The owner, who knew Michael from construction work he'd done on the building, gave us a deal that fit our budget. I designed simple digital invitations myself, writing words that came from the heart instead of formal language copied from etiquette guides. My parents tried calling throughout the week, but I let the calls go to voicemail. Each message sounded increasingly frustrated, my mother leaving lengthy explanations about how I was overreacting, my father's shorter messages demanding I stop being childish and discuss this like an adult. I deleted them without listening to the end, each one just confirming what I already knew. Friday morning brought an unexpected call from Lauren. I almost didn't answer, still stinging from her casual cruelty, but curiosity won out. "Mom's invited the Haverford family to my bridal shower," she said without preamble, and for once, she sounded upset rather than smugly superior. As in Christopher Haverford, as in my ex-boyfriend Christopher. My stomach sank as I processed this information. Christopher Haverford was everything our parents had wanted for Lauren. Old money, Ivy League education, a junior position at his family's investment firm. They'd been devastated when Lauren broke it off 2 years ago to date Preston, who, despite his suitable background, wasn't quite at the Haverford level of wealth and connection. "She claims it's because his mother is on the hospital board with her," Lauren continued, "but we both know what she's doing. And get this, she told Preston the date was changed due to a scheduling conflict with the venue. She's literally trying to orchestrate a reconciliation at my bridal shower." I closed my eyes, recognizing the pattern all too well. Our mother couldn't control Lauren's choice of husband entirely, so she was trying to manage it, to nudge it in a direction she preferred. "She's doing to you what they did to me," I said quietly. "Different tactics, same goal. Control." "Not exactly," Lauren replied, and there was an edge to her voice. "I'm still getting my party at the Rosewood. They're not canceling on me. They're just trying to manipulate who I celebrate with. But Emma, for what it's worth, I really am sorry about what they said about Michael. It was cruel and it was wrong." It was the closest Lauren had ever come to acknowledging our parents' behavior as problematic. We'd spent our lives in carefully divided camps, me the rebellious one, her the golden child, never quite allies despite being sisters. Why don't you come to our engagement party? I offered impulsively. Bring Preston. Show them you won't be manipulated either. The line went quiet for so long I thought she'd hung up. I can't, she finally said, and the regret in her voice sounded genuine. Dad's announcing that I'm joining the family company at the shower. I've worked for 3 years to get this position, Emma. I can't risk it, even for you, even though I know it's wrong. So you'll let them control you as long as there's something in it for you, I said, disappointment heavy in my chest. What about Preston? What about standing up for what's right? I'll handle it my way, she said defensively. Look, not all of us can afford to burn bridges with the family. Some of us have practical considerations. Some of us need their support. After we hung up, I sat at my desk staring at the half-finished invitation list on my screen. Even this small act of independence felt hollow now, knowing that while I was taking a stand, my family would continue on as if nothing had happened, as if I didn't matter. The Rosewood would host Lauren's shower, our parents would scheme and manipulate, and life in their world would go on without me. Michael found me that evening sitting on our tiny balcony, my engagement ring catching the light as I twisted it around my finger. The weight of everything, the canceled party, the family dynamics, the choice I was making, pressed down on me like a physical thing. He sat beside me quietly, waiting for me to find words for what I was feeling. I keep thinking about when I was little, I said finally, watching the sun set over the Charlotte skyline. My mother used to tell me bedtime stories about princesses who were brave and kind and true. She'd tuck me in and say that someday I'd find my prince and live happily ever after. I just never imagined that when I found him, she'd be the dragon trying to keep us apart. Michael took my hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on my palm. Maybe the real story is about the princess who realizes she doesn't need anyone's permission to be happy, he suggested. Maybe she just needs to be brave enough to write her own ending. I turned to look at him, this man who saw me more clearly than my own family ever had, and felt something settle in my chest. A decision, a resolution, a quiet kind of courage. Saturday morning dawned gray and drizzly, matching my mood as I prepared for what should have been our engagement party at the Rosewood. Michael made coffee while I stood in front of my closet, debating what to wear to not attend my own canceled celebration. The invitation responses for our replacement party next weekend were coming in steadily, friends and colleagues who were genuinely excited to celebrate with us. But today felt like a day for mourning what should have been. I was deep in these thoughts when Michael appeared in the bedroom doorway, fully dressed and holding his car keys. Get ready, he said, something determined in his expression. We're going to Lauren's bridal shower. I nearly dropped the dress I was holding. What? Why would we subject ourselves to that? Because hiding feels like admitting they've won, he said, coming to stand beside me. Going to our own party next week, that's choosing our own path. But showing up today, being ourselves, not letting them dictate our actions, that's refusing to be erased. They'll be awful to you, I warned, even as I felt a spark of something like hope. You know they will. They'll make cutting remarks and treat you like you don't belong. Michael shrugged with a calm I didn't quite believe. They already think I'm not good enough. What's the worst that could happen? They confirm what they already believe? At least we'll have shown that we're not ashamed, that we're not hiding, that their opinion doesn't define us. By the time we arrived at the Rosewood Country Club, my hands were trembling so badly I could barely hold my purse. The venue was everything I remembered from my teenage dreams. Elegant and timeless with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking manicured gardens. White and gold dominated the color scheme. Fresh flowers adorned every surface, and a string quartet played softly in the corner. It was the engagement party I'd imagined, except it was for Lauren's pre-wedding celebration instead. My mother spotted us first from across the room, her practiced smile faltering for just a moment before she recovered, gliding toward us in her designer dress and pearls. Emma, what a surprise, she said, her voice pitched low so others wouldn't hear. And Michael. Her gaze flicked over him dismissively. Darling, this is a private family event. We didn't send you an invitation for a reason. I know, I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the anger building in my chest. You made it very clear where I stand in this family. But Lauren is still my sister, and I'm here to support her, regardless of your efforts to erase me. My mother's smile turned brittle, the one she used when someone was being difficult at a charity board meeting. Of course, how mature of you, she said, each word dripping with false sweetness. Just please try not to make this afternoon about your situation. This is Lauren's special day, and I won't have you creating drama. As she glided away to greet more acceptable guests, Michael squeezed my hand. "You okay?" he whispered, and I loved him even more for checking in, for being my anchor in this storm of social pretense. "I will be," I promised, though my confidence wavered as we made our way through the room. The afternoon progressed exactly as painfully as I'd expected. My father barely acknowledged our presence, too busy networking with the Haverford family to bother with his disappointment of a daughter. Michael was repeatedly mistaken for staff by my parents' friends, one woman actually trying to hand him her empty champagne glass, before I intervened with icy politeness. But the worst part was watching Lauren navigate the minefield our mother had created. Christopher Haverford had been strategically seated at her table, despite Preston being relegated to a corner with some distant cousins. Every time Lauren tried to include her actual fiancé in conversation, our mother would steer things back to Christopher, bringing up shared memories and inside jokes from their past relationship. The final blow came during the toasts. My father stood at the front of the room, champagne glass raised, his voice carrying that particular tone of authority he used when closing business deals. "Today we celebrate not just Lauren's upcoming wedding," he began, his gaze finding her in the crowd, "but the continuation of a family legacy built on wise choices and strategic connections." His eyes moved meaningfully between Lauren and Christopher before continuing. "In fact, I'm delighted to announce that Lauren will be joining Morrison Enterprises as Vice President of Development, where she'll be working closely with our new partners at Haverford Financial." The room erupted in polite applause, but I saw Lauren's face go pale, saw Preston's confused expression, saw our mother's satisfied smile. This wasn't just a bridal shower. It was a business arrangement disguised as a celebration, binding Lauren to her ex-boyfriend's family through professional ties that would make her current engagement increasingly complicated. Our parents weren't just trying to control her romantic life, they were creating a web of obligations that would be nearly impossible to escape. As the implications sank in, I felt Michael tense beside me. Following his gaze, I saw a man I didn't recognize staring at us from across the room, his expression shifting from disbelief to something like recognition, then to urgent interest. He was older, distinguished in that way successful businessmen often were, and he seemed to be trying to place Michael in a context that didn't match the country club setting. "Michael," I whispered, "who is that man? He keeps staring at us." "Richard Thornton," Michael replied quietly, and I heard something in his voice I couldn't quite identify. "CEO of Thornton Development Group." Before I could ask why one of the Southeast's most prominent developers would be interested in us, Michael was already standing, tension radiating from his shoulders. "We need to leave," he said, the words urgent but calm. "Now." As we made our excuses and slipped out, I caught a glimpse of Richard Thornton pulling my father aside, gesturing in our direction with unmistakable excitement. Something had shifted in the room's dynamics, though I didn't understand what or why. The drive home was silent except for the rain pattering against the windshield. Michael's jaw was set, his hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. "Are you going to tell me what that was about?" I asked, watching his profile as he navigated through Saturday afternoon traffic. He sighed, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "Remember that project I've been working on for the past 2 years? The one I couldn't talk about? The Sustainable Building Initiative?" I'd always respected his discretion about this particular project, knowing it involved proprietary technology and competitive bids. He'd work late into the night on designs and proposals, emerging from his home office exhausted but excited, unable to share details due to confidentiality agreements. "The one that might change everything," I said, quoting his own words back to him from one of those late nights when I'd brought him coffee and he'd looked up at me with such hope in his eyes. Michael glanced at me, a rueful smile playing at his lips. "It's done, Emma. The patents were approved last month. The implementation contracts are being finalized. Thornton Development is the primary buyer." My mind raced to process this information, understanding starting to dawn. "That's amazing, Michael. But what does that have to do with what happened back there?" He pulled into his apartment complex, parking but not moving to get out of the truck. "Richard Thornton's company is buying exclusive rights to my sustainable building system. It's a new technology that reduces construction costs by 40% while meeting all green building standards. The deal is worth—" He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "Worth what?" I prompted, reaching for his hand. His fingers intertwined with mine as he finally met my eyes. $8.5 million for the patents and ongoing royalties," he said quietly, "plus consulting contracts for implementation. The announcement goes public Monday morning. The number hit me like a physical blow, but not in the way my parents' cruelty had. This was Michael, my Michael, who fixed his own truck and cooked dinner in a tiny apartment kitchen, telling me he was about to become wealthy beyond anything I'd imagined. Before I could fully process this information, my phone exploded with notifications. 3 missed calls from my father, 2 from my mother, and a series of increasingly frantic texts from Lauren. What did Michael do? Dad's losing his mind. Thornton says Michael's some kind of genius inventor. Call me. I showed Michael my phone screen, and he laughed, though there was no humor in it. I guess Thornton recognized me and mentioned it to your father. Probably assumed he already knew about his future son-in-law's business dealings. Inside Michael's apartment, safe from the rain and the judgment and the suffocating expectations of the country club, he showed me everything. The patents with their technical drawings I couldn't fully understand, but that represented years of work. The contracts with Thornton Development. The press release scheduled for Monday that would announce his revolutionary contribution to sustainable construction. My eyes kept catching on the numbers, not just the money, but the scope of it. Buildings across the country that would be built using his designs. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, looking up from the laptop screen to find him watching me with worried eyes. Michael ran a hand through his hair, messing it up in that way that always made me want to smooth it back down. The legal agreements were strict about confidentiality until everything was finalized, he said. But also, I wanted to be sure you loved me for me, not for what I might become. I've seen what money does to relationships, how it changes things. I needed to know that what we have is real. I thought about my parents, about their careful calculations of worth based on bank accounts and family names, about how they'd dismissed this brilliant, kind man because he didn't fit their narrow definition of success. Then I thought about all the nights Michael had held me while I cried about feeling like a disappointment, all the mornings he'd made me laugh over breakfast, all the ways he'd shown me what real love looked like. What we have is the only real thing in my life, I told him, closing the laptop and moving to sit in his lap, wrapping my arms around his neck. This money, it's incredible, and you deserve every penny for your hard work and brilliance. But it doesn't change anything between us. It just proves what I already knew, that you're extraordinary, that my parents are fools, and that I'm the luckiest woman in Charlotte to be marrying you. We stayed like that for a long moment, holding each other while the rain drummed against the windows. Then my phone rang again. My father. I looked at Michael, who nodded encouragingly and answered on speaker. Emma, he began, his voice unusually deferential, missing its typical commanding tone. Is Michael with you? I'd very much like to speak with him about a potential collaboration opportunity. The audacity was breathtaking. 6 hours ago, my father could barely bring himself to acknowledge Michael's existence. Now, knowing about the money and success, he was eager to talk business. It's Saturday evening, Dad, I said, my voice cool despite the anger bubbling underneath. What opportunity could possibly be so urgent? There was a pause, and I could picture him in his study, calculating how much to reveal. Richard Thornton mentioned that Michael has developed some groundbreaking sustainable technology. Morrison Enterprises is expanding into green development, and we'd be very interested in discussing potential partnerships. Of course, there would be numerous benefits for family members. Family members. As if Michael had suddenly become family simply because his bank account was about to grow. As if money could erase the way they'd treated him, the party they'd canceled, the judgment they'd rendered. I felt Michael's hand on my back, steady and supportive, and made a decision. Actually, I said, a plan forming as I spoke, we'd love to discuss this further. How about brunch tomorrow? Let's say 11 at the Rosewood Country Club. I'm sure you can arrange for their private dining room on short notice. My father agreed immediately, promising to make the arrangements, his relief palpable even through the phone. After I hung up, Michael looked at me with raised eyebrows. The Rosewood? Are you sure you want to do this? Absolutely, I said, my determination crystallizing into something hard and bright. If they want to talk business with you now that you're successful, they can do it in the exact venue where our engagement party should have been. They can face who you really are, not who they assumed you were, and they can do it knowing exactly what their snobbery cost them. Michael smiled, but concern still lingered in his eyes. Emma, I never wanted this money to matter. That's why I live simply, why I never mentioned it was coming. I wanted to be valued for my work and my character, not my net worth. And I do value you for those things, I assured him. But tomorrow isn't about the money. It's about justice. It's about showing them that their shallow judgments blinded them to something extraordinary. It's about reclaiming our dignity and our story. As we prepared for bed that night, my phone buzzed with one final text from my father. Brunch confirmed. Private dining room at Rosewood. Looking forward to discussing this exciting opportunity with David. The stage was set for our own version of poetic justice, served with a side of eggs Benedict and long overdue truth. Sunday morning arrived bright and clear, the previous day's rain leaving everything washed clean and sparkling. The metaphor wasn't lost on me as we prepared for brunch at the club that had haunted my dreams. Michael dressed deliberately in his usual weekend clothes, jeans and a simple button-down shirt, the same unpretentious style he'd worn since I met him. I chose a sundress I'd bought at Target, professional but clearly not designer, both of us refusing to play dress-up for my parents' approval now that the bank accounts had shifted. The Rosewood Country Club looked different in daylight, less imposing, more transparent. Morning sun streamed through those famous windows, illuminating every carefully polished surface, every perfectly placed flower arrangement. There was nowhere to hide in this light, no shadows to soften hard truths. My parents arrived first, my mother and Saint. John knit despite the warm weather, my father in golf attire that probably cost more than most people's rent. They'd brought Lauren, who looked uncomfortable but curious, and to my surprise, Preston was with her. A small show of defiance that gave me hope. "Emma, darling," my mother said, rising to air-kiss my cheek as if yesterday's cruelty hadn't happened. "And Michael, so wonderful to see you again." She actually took his hands in hers, her smile bright and false as costume jewelry. "Your success is just marvelous. We're so proud. Proud." The words sat between us like an uninvited guest. 24 hours ago, she couldn't be bothered to speak directly to Michael at Lauren's shower. Now she was proud, as if she'd had anything to do with his achievements, as if she hadn't tried to convince me he wasn't worth celebrating. "Thank you for arranging this, Mrs. Morrison," Michael replied politely, extracting his hands from her grip. His demeanor was exactly the same as every other time he'd dealt with my parents, polite, respectful, but utterly unimpressed by their social status or newfound interest. We settled at a table overlooking the gardens where my engagement party photos should have been taken. Crystal glasses appeared as if by magic, filled with orange juice and champagne. My father launched immediately into business talk, his prepared speech about synergies and mutual benefits rolling out with practiced ease. "Morrison Enterprises has been looking to expand into sustainable development," he said, gesturing with his mimosa as if he'd been passionate about green building for years rather than minutes. "Your technology could give us a significant advantage in the market. And of course, as family, we could offer very favorable terms." As family. I watched Michael's face remain carefully neutral as my father claimed him as family now that profit was involved. My mother nodded along, occasionally touching Michael's arm as if they were old friends, mentioning connections she could make, people she could introduce him to, doors that would open with the Morrison name behind him. When my father finally paused for breath, I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder I'd prepared that morning. "Before we discuss any potential business arrangements," I said calmly, "I think we should be clear about what we're actually discussing." I opened the folder, revealing printed copies of the press release and contract summaries Michael had shared with me. "Michael isn't just developing some sustainable technology," I continued, turning the papers to face my parents. "He's invented a revolutionary building system that's going to transform the construction industry. Thornton Development is paying $8.5 million for exclusive rights, plus ongoing royalties that will likely double that amount within 5 years." The silence that followed was deafening. My father's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: shock, calculation, regret, and finally, something that might have been shame. My mother's smile froze, her hand still extended toward Michael's arm, but no longer making contact. "I believe," I continued, my voice steady despite the years of hurt behind it, "that Morrison Enterprises actually bid on the Thornton project last year and came in second. Isn't that right, Dad? You called it an ambitious but impractical pipe dream in the board meeting minutes." My father cleared his throat, his usual commanding presence somehow diminished in the morning light. "We weren't aware of Michael's involvement," he said stiffly. "The proposals were submitted through anonymous channels." "Of course they were," I said, "because Michael believes work should be judged on its merits, not on connections or family names. Novel concept, isn't it?" Lauren was staring between Michael and the papers, comprehension dawning on her face. "Wait," she said slowly. "You're the MT consulting that beat out Dad's bid?" "Preston applied to work with your team last year. He said the innovation coming out of that company was incredible. Preston nodded, looking at Michael with obvious respect. I didn't make it past the technical interview. The engineering requirements were beyond anything I'd studied. You were building something completely new. Michael accepted the compliment with a quiet nod, still maintaining his composure despite the complete shift in power dynamics at the table. We obviously misjudged the situation, my father said, the words seeming to physically pain him. Perhaps we could start fresh. Host a proper engagement party for you both, here at the Rosewood, of course. No expense spared. The Winchester family is having their anniversary gala next month, and I could arrange. No, I interrupted, surprising myself with how calm I felt. We're having our engagement party next Saturday at the Mill Creek Brewery rooftop. Simple, honest, with people who've supported us all along, who valued Michael when he was just a hardworking contractor with big dreams, not a millionaire with patents. The people who saw his worth when you couldn't see past his truck. My mother tried one more time, her voice taking on a wheedling quality I recognized from childhood negotiations. Emma, darling, surely you can see this is all a misunderstanding. If we'd known about Michael's potential, and there it was, the admission that cut deeper than all their previous dismissals. If they'd known about his potential, not his character, not his love for me, not his brilliant mind or kind heart, his potential, measured in dollars and prestige. That's exactly the point, Mother, I said, pushing back from the table and standing. You should have seen his worth without knowing about the money. You should have celebrated our engagement because your daughter found someone who makes her happy, who treats her well, who works hard and dreams big. But you couldn't see any of that because it didn't come with the right labels or bank statements. Michael stood with me, his hand finding mine with the ease of long practice. We appreciate you finally recognizing what Emma saw from the beginning, he said, addressing my parents with quiet dignity. But we don't need your approval anymore. We haven't for a while. What Emma and I have built together, our relationship, our plans, our future, exists completely independent of your blessing or your business propositions. As we turned to leave, Lauren suddenly spoke up. Emma, wait. She stood, pulling Preston with her. And for a moment, I saw my little sister underneath the perfect facade, the girl who used to sneak into my room at night to talk about her dreams before she learned to dream smaller, safer things. I'm sorry, she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. For the text about the party, for not standing up for you and Michael, for all of it. You're right. About everything. My parents turned to stare at her, but she kept going, courage building with each word. I've been so focused on earning their approval that I forgot to ask if it was worth earning. Yesterday at my shower, they tried to push me back together with Christopher, and I let them because I was afraid of losing my position at the company. But watching you and Michael just now, seeing how you stand together, I realized I've been living for them instead of for myself. She turned to our parents, her voice stronger now. I won't be taking the position at Morrison Enterprises. Preston and I are going to build our own life, our own way, and we'll be at Emma and Michael's engagement party next Saturday, celebrating the right way for the right reasons. The look on our parents' faces would have been comical if it weren't so sad. They'd spent so much time orchestrating lives for their daughters that they'd never considered we might refuse to play our assigned roles. In the end, we left together, the four of us walking out of the Rosewood Country Club into the bright morning sun. My parents remained at their table, surrounded by the trappings of their carefully curated life, perhaps beginning to understand what their rigid standards had cost them. Or perhaps not. Some people, as Michael had once told me, can only see value in what they already understand. The next Saturday, the rooftop at Mill Creek Brewery was transformed with simple white lights and wildflowers in mason jars. Friends filled the space with genuine laughter and warm congratulations. Lauren and Preston were there, dancing badly to the local band we'd hired, looking happier than I'd seen them in years. My childhood friend Sarah gave a toast that made everyone cry, talking about true love and chosen family. Michael's mother, who'd flown in from Texas, hugged me so tight I could barely breathe, whispering that she was proud to have me as a daughter. As the sun set over Charlotte's skyline, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, I stood with Michael at the edge of the rooftop, looking out at the city we were building our life in. The Rosewood Country Club was visible in the distance, its manicured perfection a stark contrast to our joyful chaos of mismatched chairs and borrowed speakers. Any regrets? Michael asked, his arm around my waist, pulling me close. About your parents? About how it all went down? I thought about it, really considered the question. There was grief there, certainly. The loss of the family I'd hoped mine could be. the relationship with my parents that might have been if they could have seen past their own limitations. But stronger than the grief was relief. Relief at no longer pretending, at no longer making excuses, at no longer trying to earn approval that came with so many conditions it wasn't really approval at all. No regrets, I told him, meaning it completely. Just gratitude. For you, for this life we're building, for the family we're choosing, and for finally understanding that love, real love, doesn't come with prerequisites or qualifications. It just is. As if in response to my words, my phone buzzed with a text. I almost ignored it, not wanting anything to interrupt this perfect moment, but Michael nodded toward it. Might be important, he said, though his smile suggested he wasn't too concerned. It was from my mother. We were wrong. Can we talk? I showed it to Michael, who raised an eyebrow. What do you want to do? He asked, and I loved him for making it my choice, for not pushing either reconciliation or continued estrangement. I thought about it, then typed back, maybe someday, but not yet, and definitely not on your terms. Then I turned off my phone, tucked it away, and went back to our party. There would be time for difficult conversations later, for possibly rebuilding some kind of relationship with my parents if they could learn to respect our boundaries. But tonight was for celebrating, for dancing under string lights with the man who'd stood by me, for toasting with friends who'd shown up not because of what we could offer them, but because they loved us. Later, as we slow danced to the band's last song, Michael whispered in my ear, "You know the money doesn't change anything, right? I'm still the same guy who helped you with your blueprints at that coffee shop. I'm still going to drive my truck until it falls apart and cook dinner in our tiny kitchen. And I love you for exactly that," I whispered back, "for seeing through to what matters, for building something real in a world full of facades, for being exactly who you are." The party ended, but our story was just beginning. We'd chosen love over approval, authenticity over appearances, and each other over everyone else's expectations. And as we cleaned up together, laughing about my uncle's terrible dance moves and the way Michael's cousin had caught the bouquet with a football dive, I knew we'd made the right choice. We'd written our own ending, one where love wasn't measured in bank accounts or bloodlines, but in the simple act of choosing each other again and again, against all odds and expectations. The Monday morning press release caused quite a stir in Charlotte's business community. My father's phone rang off the hook with colleagues wanting to know why he hadn't mentioned his future son-in-law's innovation. Several of his golf buddies called to congratulate him on the family connection to such a brilliant young entrepreneur. By all accounts, he accepted these congratulations with gritted teeth and whatever grace he could muster. Michael and I watched the chaos unfold from a safe distance, focused on our own plans and preparations. The wedding would be small, we decided. Just the people who truly mattered. No country club, no society pages, no orchestrated business connections disguised as celebration. Instead, we'd marry in the botanical gardens where we'd had one of our first dates, surrounded by nature and the people who'd supported our journey. 3 months later, as I stood in my simple wedding dress, wildflowers in my hair instead of an elaborate veil, I thought about the engagement party that never was. The Rosewood would have been beautiful, certainly. The photos would have been perfect for my mother's social media and the society columns she so carefully cultivated. But this was real. This was ours. This was worth more than all the approval and country club memberships in the world. Lauren served as my maid of honor, having fully embraced her new path outside our parents' influence. She and Preston had started their own consulting firm, small but growing, built on their own merits rather than family connections. Our parents attended the wedding, sitting quietly in the back, having learned that their presence was a privilege we could revoke rather than an obligation we had to fulfill. As Michael and I exchanged vows under a canopy of wisteria, promising to love and support each other without conditions or prerequisites, I thought about all the couples who'd never make it this far. The ones who let family pressure and social expectations tear them apart. The ones who valued approval over authenticity. The ones who never learned that love, real love, is worth more than all the country clubs and corner offices in the world. Our story wasn't unique in its challenges. Families have been trying to control their children's choices since the beginning of time, measuring worth in dollars and degrees rather than character and kindness. But perhaps it was unique in its resolution. We didn't just survive the pressure, we thrived despite it. We didn't just reject their values, we created our own. We didn't just love each other, we chose each other, consciously and deliberately, in the face of every reason not to. Years later, when young couples would ask us for advice, when they'd struggle with family disapproval or social pressure, we'd tell them this story. Not to encourage them to cut ties with their families, but to remind them that love requires courage. Real love, the kind that builds a life and weathers storms, demands that you see clearly, choose wisely, and stand firmly in your truth. My parents eventually came to appreciate Michael for who he was, not just for his success. It took time and careful boundary setting, missed holidays, and honest conversations, but slowly they learned to see what I'd seen all along. That worth isn't measured in bank accounts or bloodlines, but in how someone treats others, in the dreams they chase, in the love they give freely without calculating its return on investment. The Rosewood Country Club still stands, still hosts parties for Charlotte's elite, still maintains its careful standards about who belongs and who doesn't. But for me, it's no longer a symbol of dreams deferred or acceptance denied. It's a reminder of the day I chose love over approval, authenticity over appearances, and the man who helped me carry blueprints in the wind over everyone who thought he wasn't enough. Because in the end, that's what love does. It shows us who we really are, strips away the facades and expectations, and asks us to choose, not just once, but every day. In small moments and grand gestures, in canceled parties and rooftop celebrations, in family conflicts and quiet mornings. Love asks us to be brave enough to write our own story, even when everyone else is holding a different pen. And so we did. We wrote a story of sustainable buildings and sustainable love, of innovation in construction and reconstruction of family, of breaking ground and breaking free. A story where the princess doesn't need anyone's permission to choose her prince, where the prince doesn't need a pedigree to prove his worth, where happily ever after isn't found in a country club, but in a tiny kitchen where someone who loves you makes your coffee just right every single morning. That's the story I tell now, to anyone who needs to hear it. The story of how my parents canceled my engagement party because my fiancé wasn't good enough for the family, and how that turned out to be the best gift they ever gave me. Because in trying to control our story, they forced us to write our own. And ours, it turns out, was so much better than anything they could have imagined. The irony, of course, is that Michael's success with sustainable building technology has made him exactly the kind of person my parents always wanted me to marry. Wealthy, influential, sought after by major corporations. He's been featured in architectural magazines and speaks at conferences. CEOs take his calls. His innovations are changing how cities think about growth and environmental responsibility. But none of that is why I married him. I married him because he makes me laugh when I'm taking myself too seriously, because he still stops to help strangers with their groceries, because he teaches kids in our neighborhood how to build things with their hands, because when my mother finally apologized, really apologized with tears and genuine remorse, he was the first to encourage me to forgive her. I married him because he sees me, really sees me, not as the rebellious daughter or the family disappointment or even as the successful architect I've become. He sees me as Emma, complex and flawed and trying her best, and he loves all of it without reservation or condition. That's worth more than every country club membership and society page mentioned combined. So to anyone reading this who's facing family pressure, who's being told their love isn't good enough, who's watching their engagement party get canceled because their partner doesn't meet someone else's standards, know this: your love is valid. Your choice matters. Your happiness is worth more than their approval. And sometimes, just sometimes, the party that gets canceled is the one that sets you free to celebrate something so much better. A life built on truth, love, and the courage to choose each other against all odds. That's our story. Not a fairy tale with a perfect ending, but a real story with a true one, where love wins not because it conquers all, but because it helps us see what's worth conquering and what's worth leaving behind. Where the real celebration isn't in the venue or the guest list, but in the moment, two people look at each other and say, "Yes, I choose you exactly as you are, forever and always, no matter what anyone else thinks." And that choice, that celebration, that love, it's worth everything. Looking back now, 5 years after that canceled engagement party, I can trace the threads that led us here. Michael's sustainable building company has grown beyond our wildest dreams, but more importantly, so has our life together. We bought a little house in one of Charlotte's older neighborhoods, not in the gated communities where I grew up, but in a place with character and history and neighbors who actually know each other's names. The kitchen where Michael makes my coffee every morning is bigger than his old apartments, but still cozy enough that we bump into each other while cooking, usually leading to impromptu dance sessions or stolen kisses between stirring pots. The blueprints scattered on our dining table now are often collaborative projects, my architectural eye combined with his innovative technology, creating spaces that are both beautiful and revolutionary. My mother visits sometimes, tentatively rebuilding our relationship one careful conversation at a time. She's learning to see the world beyond her narrow scope, though it's slow progress. Last month, she actually asked Michael for advice about making their office building more environmentally friendly. Not because of his money or influence, but because she genuinely respected his expertise. It was a small moment, but it meant everything. Lauren and Preston are expecting their first child, and they've asked us to be godparents. They're raising their family on their own terms, having learned from our experience that authentic happiness is worth more than inherited approval. Their consulting firm just landed a major contract, proving that success doesn't require compromising your values or relationships. The Rosewood Country Club called last year, ironically enough, wanting to hire Michael's company to renovate their facilities to meet new environmental standards. We took the meeting in the same private dining room where that fateful brunch had occurred, and the symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. Michael accepted the contract with grace, never mentioning the irony, but I saw the quiet satisfaction in his eyes as he signed papers in the place that had once rejected him. But perhaps the most meaningful change is in how I see myself. No longer the rebellious daughter or the family disappointment, I've grown into a woman who understands her own worth. My architectural firm specializes in affordable housing now, creating beautiful spaces for families who remind me that home isn't about square footage or prestigious addresses, but about love and belonging and the courage to build something real. Every Thursday evening, Michael teaches a free workshop at the community center, showing kids from underprivileged backgrounds how to work with their hands, how to build and create and dream beyond their circumstances. I often join him, talking about design and possibility, watching young faces light up with the realization that they can shape their own futures. Some of our parents' friends have asked why we waste our time on charity work that doesn't even offer tax benefits. They still don't understand that the real benefit is in the joy on those kids' faces, in planting seeds of possibility that money can't buy. Our own engagement party, the one we threw at Mill Creek Brewery, became something of a legend among our friend group. Not because it was fancy or expensive, but because it was real. Because it represented choosing love over fear, authenticity over approval, joy over judgment. Friends still talk about how happy we looked, how the simple decorations and local band created more magic than any country club ever could. Sometimes I drive past the Rosewood on my way to job sites, and I think about the girl I was, desperate for approval and validation from people who could only see value through their own limited lens. I want to tell her it is going to be okay, that the pain of rejection will transform into the power of self-determination, that losing her parents' approval will ultimately lead to finding herself. But she had to go through it, had to feel the sting of that canceled party and the weight of their disappointment to become who I am now. Every step of that journey, every tear and moment of doubt led to this life where love isn't conditional and success isn't measured by anyone else's standards, but our own. The sustainable building technology that changed everything, it's now being used in low-income housing projects across the Southeast, making environmental responsibility accessible to families who are usually priced out of green living. Michael insisted on keeping licensing fees low for these projects, much to some investors' frustration. But he remembers what it was like to grow up watching his mother worry about heating bills, and no amount of money will make him forget that responsibility to community comes before profit margins. We're planning to start a family soon, and sometimes I wonder what values we'll pass on to our children. They'll grow up with advantages neither Michael nor I had at their age, but I hope we can teach them what really matters. That worth isn't inherited but earned through kindness and hard work. That love doesn't require approval from anyone but the person you're choosing. That sometimes the best thing that can happen is having your party canceled because it forces you to create your own celebration on your own terms. My father still struggles with the reversal of fortune, the fact that his dismissed future son-in-law became more successful than he ever imagined. But to his credit, he's trying. He recently admitted in a quiet moment after Sunday dinner that he'd been wrong, not just about Michael, but about what constitutes value in this world. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was honest, and that's more than I ever expected. The friends who celebrated with us on that brewery rooftop remain the core of our chosen family. They were there when we had nothing but love and determination, and they're here now when we could afford any venue in the city. That consistency, that loyalty based on who we are, rather than what we have, is worth more than all the fair-weather friendships in the world. I've learned that every family has its story of missed opportunities and misunderstood values. Every generation thinks it knows better than the one before, And every parent believes they're protecting their children when they're really protecting their own vision of what life should look like. The lucky ones learn to see beyond these limitations. The really lucky ones have someone like Michael to help them find the courage to break free. So yes, our engagement party was canceled because my fiancé wasn't good enough for my family. And yes, it was one of the most painful experiences of my life. But it was also the catalyst for everything beautiful that followed. It forced me to choose between the life prescribed for me and the life I actually wanted. It showed me who truly loved me and who only loved the idea of me. It taught me that real celebration comes from authentic joy, not perfect venues or approved guest lists. If I could go back and change things, prevent that cancellation and have the Rosewood party I dreamed about, I wouldn't. Because that pain, that rejection, that forced choice between approval and authenticity made us who we are. It built the foundation of a marriage based on mutual respect and genuine partnership. It created the conditions for a life where success is self-defined and love is unconditional. That's the final truth of our story. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us become the best things for us. Sometimes rejection is just redirection towards something better. Sometimes a canceled party is really an invitation to create your own celebration, one that actually reflects who you are and what you value. Michael still drives a practical truck, though he could afford any luxury car he wants. I still shop at Target, finding joy in good deals and practical choices. We still cook dinner together in our cozy kitchen, dancing to music only we can hear, building a life that looks nothing like what my parents envisioned, but everything like what we dreamed. And every time I see another young couple struggling with family expectations, every time I hear about another canceled celebration or withdrawn approval because someone doesn't meet arbitrary standards, I remember our story. I remember that love is brave and worth fighting for. I remember that authenticity trumps approval every time. I remember that the best parties are the ones we throw for ourselves, surrounded by people who love us as we are. That's the legacy of our canceled engagement party. A life built on truth. A love that doesn't require permission, and the knowledge that sometimes the best thing that can happen is not getting what you thought you wanted. Because what we built instead, what we chose and created and celebrated on our own terms, is so much better than anything we could have had with their approval. It's a love story, yes, but it's also a freedom story. A story about breaking generational patterns and choosing your own path. About learning that family is who shows up for you, not just who shares your DNA. About discovering that worth isn't determined by bank accounts or bloodlines, but by the love you give and the life you build with your own hands. And that story, our story, continues every day in small moments and grand gestures, in the life we've built and the love we've sustained. It's worth more than any party at any country club could ever be. It's worth everything we gave up and more. Because in the end, we didn't just find love. We found ourselves, and we found the courage to be those selves completely, authentically, unapologetically. That's what I wish for everyone reading this. Not necessarily a canceled party or family drama, but the clarity that comes from being tested, the strength that comes from choosing love over approval, the joy that comes from building a life on your own terms, and the wisdom to know that sometimes the best celebrations are the ones we create ourselves, with people who love us not despite who we are, but because of it. This is our story, mine and Michael's, but it's also bigger than us. It's about everyone who's ever been told they're not enough, that their choices are wrong, that their love doesn't measure up. It's about the courage to disagree, to choose differently, to build something beautiful from the pieces of other people's disapproval. It's about learning that the only approval that really matters is your own, and the only love worth having is the kind that accepts you completely, without conditions or prerequisites or canceled parties. So here's to the rebels and the dreamers, the ones who choose love over logic and authenticity over approval. Here's to the canceled parties that lead to better celebrations, the rejected partners who become beloved spouses, the difficult choices that lead to beautiful lives. Here's to writing your own story, even when everyone else is holding a different pen. And here's to love, real love. The kind that builds sustainable buildings and sustainable happiness. The kind that sees through to what really matters. The kind that's worth more than all the country club memberships in the world. That's what we found when my parents canceled our engagement party. Not just love, but freedom. Not just each other, but ourselves. Not just a party, but a life worth celebrating every single day.